Hello everyone and welcome to another amazing game that just finished from round 6 of this year's FIDE Grand Swiss. It is world champion Gukesh Dommaraju versus Greek Grandmaster Nikolas Theodorou, and we've covered a lot of games by Nikolas lately. He's one of the two players that I follow everywhere, not physically, but where they're playing. The other one, of course, being Vasily Ivanchuk, as he just has a very unique style of playing. And also he just beats very strong players. His famous victories include against Temur Rajabov. He defeated him in classical, spending only 2 minutes on the clock. Then he defeated Arjun Erigaizi. He defeated Fabiano Caruana and many other grandmasters. With seemingly with ease. So it's something very unique. But here he faces the world champion. So let's see how it goes for Nikolas. Gukesh with white opens with pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5 by Nikolas, knight to f3, knight to f6, and okay, knight captures on e5, challenging the Petrov with the classical variation of the Petrov, d6, we have knight f3, and knight captures on e4. Now, my favorite here is knight to c3, but I guess for the very top level, d4 is best, as this is the classical attack of the main line. d5, bishop to d3, we have bishop to d6, and both players castle. So castles, pawn to c4, and pawn to c6. Again, thousands and thousands of games in the database with this exact same line, but here we reach a point where Gukesh decides to deviate. Knight c3, top played move, queen c2 second top played, then maybe c captures on d5, but here, no, we have pawn to c5. And if some 100 years ago you played a move like this, everyone would be like, oh, that's completely anti-positional, you can't play moves like this. But nowadays, with the use of engines, you can play pretty much whatever if the engine says it's okay. And the engine says this is okay. So, okay, c5, bishop c7, trying to throw Nikolas out of preparation, and knight to c3. We have bishop to f5, first move where Nikolas spent some time, as no one is prepared for pawn to c5, so we can safely say that he is out of theory. And there is a game where knight to e2 was played. Here, Gukesh goes for knight to g5, and it is now, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. So, Nikolas runs into Gukesh's preparation. Gukesh not even wasting any time. He gained almost 4 minutes since the game started. So, seems like Nikolas is in big trouble. And the idea is that if knight captures on g5, of course, you just trade on f5, bishop captures on f5, and you win the bishop pair, which everyone knows against the Petrov can be, it just makes it so much easier to play having this light square bishop and the dark square bishop to help out. If, for example, g6 is played at any point, it's an open board, so bishop pair is the bishop pair. But after knight g5, Nikolas goes knight captures on c3, we have b captures, and queen to f6. Nicely develops, defends the bishop here. Gukesh strikes with pawn to g4, and this is now a position on move 13 that you don't see every day, especially in a game featuring a world champion. G4 on the side of the board where you've actually castled. And is it better to keep the bishops on the board or off the board? Well, you can't really keep it on the board, as if the bishop moves, you're going to lose that h7 pawn. So bishop captures on d3, queen captures, now threatening checkmate, and we have queen to g6, offering to trade queens, as now you've played that g4 move. It'd be great if Nikolas could avoid this and try to go for an attack himself, but there's just no defense against queen h7, so you have to do it, unless you're willing to weaken your position with g6. So queen captures, we have h captures, and now rook to e1. Again, Gukesh spent very little time, so he is well within his preparation. Nikolas down to 53 minutes on the clock and goes knight to a6. A pretty weird square for the knight, as you can't really go to b4 or c5. So what is Nikolas's plan? Well, of course, pawn to b6. Gukesh goes rook to b1. We have pawn to b6 and rook to b3. Rook f to e8, offering to trade rooks, and now rook captures on e8, rook captures on e8, and rook to a3, attacking the knight here and inviting Gukesh to go for rook to e1 check. And is it the best choice? Well, it's definitely the best choice. Gukesh goes for, Nikolas goes for it. Rook to e1 check. We have king to g2, rook captures on c1, and now rook captures on a6. And the problem here is you can't just trade. If you, for example, play rook captures on c3, rook captures on a7, and you're lost. You're attacking the bishop, and you're threatening mate as the knight is covering the h7 square. So bishop to d8, only move for Nikolas, as it comes with a tempo on the knight. Knight back to f3 and king to f8. So you don't have to worry about the back rank issues. We have rook captures on a7 and now b captures on c5. We have knight to e5 going after the c6 pawn and bishop to f6. We have rook captures on f7. King to e8, this is how Nikolas activates his king, and now rook back to a7, adding a defender to that a2 pawn, and now it's time for Nikolas to start capturing. Rook captures on c3, rook to a8 with check, king to e7, and now knight captures on c6 with check. We have king d7, knight back to e5 with check, and Nikolas trades. Bishop for knight. Bishop captures on e5, d captures, and pawn to d4. And this is the position now. Nikolas with the passed d and c pawn, Gukesh with the passed a pawn and the passed e pawn. So the position is in reality a draw, but so are all positions until they are not. We have pawn to f4. Gukesh creates a massive center here. He's planning pawn to f5 and pawn to d3. So, okay, there's a pass pawn on d3 already. You know, you have to be very, very careful. And Gukesh plays rook a6. He's trying to meet pawn to d2 with rook to d6 check to pick up the pawn. Also very interesting is pawn to f5. It seems like you don't have time to play this because d2 is coming. But even if d2, you can throw in a pawn to e6 check. And now wherever the black king goes to, you can just check him. Rook check, king f6, rook to f7 check. And now after the king moves, you just bring the rook to d7. So you are in time to stop the pawn. But after d3, rook to a6 by Gukesh, which is also perfectly fine. And now pawn to c4. Okay, now the d3 pawn is defended and the rook can be activated. And the question is what to play here. Interestingly, there is only one good move for Gukesh. So the question is, what would you play here? Try to figure it out while I give you a couple of seconds. The only move that is okay for white is king to f2. Maybe you can survive with pawn to e6 check, but very unlikely. King to f2 is the only move that works, and the reason for that is that, let's say, if pawn to d2 is played, now you have rook d6 check, so you pick up the pawn, that cannot be played. And more importantly, if rook to c1, now trying to play c3 and pawn to d2, now you're already in time with king e3, and you don't have to worry about c3 as, well, the d pawn will fall, and then you have no way of moving the rook to queen the c pawn. So that is, king f2 is an absolute must here. Gukesh played rook to a7 check, and we reach a most peculiar position. Okay, sometimes you will have a position where, and this is a world champion we're talking about, plays a move and he blunders. And there's one spectacular move that the opponent can make to beat the world champion. Here in this particular position, rook a7 check, the king can go to e6, the king can go to e8, the king can go to d8, the king can go to c8, and the king can go to c6. Wherever the black king goes, now Nikolas's position is completely winning. That's the problem of rook a7. And the reason for that is that now, okay, king to e8 was played in the game, and then Gukesh started checking. And you know what we say about lots of checks. Rook 8 check, king to e7, rook a7 check, king e8, rook 8 check, king e7, rook a7 check. And here Nikolas is already nearing move 40. He played king to d8, rook to e8 check, king to d7, rook a7 check, and now king to d8. Move 40 has been reached and additional time has been granted, and he was able to do it before repeating the position 3 times. So he wanted to gain more time to check if it's actually working. And now after rook to 8 check, he goes king to c7. He calculated that now it is completely fine. Rook a7 check, king to c6, rook a6 check, king to c5, and now Gukesh just plays rook to d6, which stops pawn to d2, and we're going to discuss why this is wrong. But why is king to f2 wrong now? That is the real question. Because now after d2 and king to e2, which worked very nicely in the previous line, you have this annoying rook to d3 move. And now you're threatening to queen the pawn, and after king d1, you go c3, and that's it. There's no defense against pawn to c2 check. You have one check, rook a5 check, king to b4, and that's it. Rook a8, c2 check, the king has to capture, and you bring a queen into the game, checkmating the white king however you want to. Let's say rook to d2 checkmate. So after king c5, Gukesh of course went for rook to d6. Now he stops pawn to d2, but now rook to c2 check, king to f3, and pawn to d2, and there really is no way to stop the pawn. If king to e2, you just play pawn to c3. Now the king can move, and you play rook c1, rook e1 check, queen to pawn, and that's it. Gukesh has nothing to offer here. After d2, rook to d8 was played. Now pawn to c3. We have pawn to e6, and now rook to c1. And he was in this position on move 47 that world champion Gukesh Dommaraju resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So really a painful loss for Gukesh, especially since he lost yesterday's game as well against Abhimanyu Mishra. But yeah, what a spectacular win for Nikolas. And yeah, I mean, there's over 100 rating points gap there between the ratings, but like I said, Nikolas is the slayer of giants basically, and he doesn't care who he's playing. You know, you want to go into an endgame, let's go into an endgame. You want to go into tactical skirmish, let's do it. I'm all up for it. And he plays the London system, which is, I mean, even more insane. So yeah, really a wizard, Nikolas. And yeah, you resign because after e7, it's not really a race or anything, because you can just play rook e1 and no move for white, whatever you play. You're threatening to capture the pawn, and if the pawn queens, you don't mind giving up the rook, because now you can queen with check, and the position is so good you can even play pawn to c2 and then queen whichever pawn you want, and there's nothing white can do. So yeah, really a tough loss for Gukesh. A brilliant victory for Nikolas. And now with all of the other wins, let me just quickly check. Sorry about that. Yeah, he started off with 3 draws against Jahomir Vakidov, Igor Samonekov, and Narayan Lina, and then a victory against Ortik Nigmatov, then a draw against Yanni Pomnishi, and here he gets Gukesh, as Gukesh has lost in the previous game, so he dropped a full point, so he got paired with Nikolas. But yeah, really incredible stuff. Nikolas now also on 4 out of 6, joins everyone, and some of the games are still being played, so we're not going to show the standings, but next game, and I'm sure you guys know which one it is, we're going to show the standings. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Brilliant stuff by Nikolas as usual. I mean, at this point, we are expecting brilliant stuff from him. I would like to thank Christian Fisher, Carmen Polifronio, Austin Wheeler, Ali Yurikoglu, and Joseph McCardle for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And if you still haven't, if you want to play great fighting chess like Nikolas here, first link in the description below. Download Lotus Chess and improve immensely. See you soon.